Captain Jake Morrison stood at the bridge of the USS Defiance, watching the stars through the main viewport. The ship was old, built 20 years ago when humanity first joined the Galactic Coalition. Her hull showed battle scars from dozens of fights, and her engines made strange noises that worried the new crew members. But Jake loved this ship. She had brought him home from more battles than he could count. "Captain, we're getting a priority transmission from Admiral Sullivan," said Amy Collins from the communication station. Her young face looked worried. Jake had seen that look too many times lately. "Put her through," Jake said. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared on the main screen. She was a tough woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. Jake had served under her for 10 years and had never seen her look this defeated. "Jake, I'm afraid I have bad news," she began. "We lost the Proxima fleet." Jake felt his stomach drop. The Proxima fleet was their strongest force, with over 200 ships, including 5 dreadnoughts. "How many survivors?" 43 ships out of 212. The Void Hunters hit them hard and fast. Same pattern as always. Our weapons worked for the first hour, then they adapted. After that, it was a massacre. Jake closed his eyes. This was the 7th major fleet they had lost to the Void Hunters in 2 years. The enemy was unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They were machines built by some ancient race that had vanished long ago. Every few thousand years, they came out of the dark space between galaxies to harvest entire civilizations. "What are our orders?" Jake asked. "Evacuation. All outer rim stations are being abandoned. We're pulling back to the core worlds and making our final stand there." Chief Engineer Lisa Ward looked up from her station. She was a small woman with oil-stained hands and the smartest person Jake had ever met. "Admiral, with respect, if we keep running, there won't be any core worlds left to defend." Sullivan's face was grim. "I know, Chief, but we don't have a choice. Every time we fight them, they learn from us. They take our own weapons and tactics and use them against us. The Zephyrians had the strongest shields in the galaxy. The Void Hunters broke through them in minutes. The Crystalline Empire's energy weapons could cut through anything. The Void Hunters absorbed the energy and fed it back at double strength." Jake walked closer to the screen. "What about the evacuation? How long do we have?" "The civilian transports are already moving. Your job is to escort the ships from Kepler Station to the core worlds. The Defiance and 3 other ships will guard the convoy." Tactical Officer Ryan Burke spoke up from his station. He was young but had good instincts. "Admiral, our long-range sensors are picking up something big heading this way. Looks like a Void Hunter fleet." Sullivan's face went pale. "How long until they reach you?" Ryan checked his instruments. 6 hours, maybe 7. "The evacuation won't be complete for another 10 hours, Sullivan said. "You need to buy us time." Jake looked at his crew. These people trusted him to bring them home alive. Lisa Ward had 2 kids on Earth. Amy Collins was engaged to a teacher on Mars. Ryan Burke was only 25 years old. They all deserved to live long lives, not die in some hopeless battle against machines. But Jake also thought about the 40,000 civilians on the transport ships. Families, children, old people who had done nothing wrong except live on the frontier. If the Defiance ran now, those people would die. "Admiral, will escort the transports as ordered," Jake said. Sullivan nodded. "Good luck, Captain. Try to stay alive out there." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Jake could feel his crew looking at him, waiting for orders. Dr. Pete Hansen came onto the bridge. He was the ship's medical officer, a calm man in his 40s who always seemed to know what people were thinking. "Captain, I've been studying the reports from the other battles. The Void Hunters don't just adapt to our weapons. They learn from everything we do. Our formations, our communication patterns, even the way we think." "What are you saying, Doc?" Jake asked. "I'm saying maybe we've been fighting them wrong. Every battle, we try to be smarter than them. We make plans, follow tactics, use logic, but they're machines. They're better at logic than we are." Lisa Ward wiped her hands on a rag. "So what do we do? Fight stupid?" "Maybe," Pete said. "Maybe the answer isn't to be smarter. Maybe it's to be more human." Jake didn't understand what Pete meant, but he filed the thought away. Right now, he had more immediate problems. Amy, send a message to all ships in the system. Tell them we're staying to cover the evacuation. Sir, that's not what the Admiral ordered, Amy said carefully. The Admiral ordered us to escort the transports. We can't do that if they get destroyed before they can jump to hyperspace. Jake turned to address his crew. I won't lie to you, the odds are bad. Every fleet that's fought the Void Hunters has been destroyed. But those 40,000 people on the transports need time to escape. We're going to give them that time. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then Lisa Ward spoke up. Well, this old bucket of bolts has been through worse. Ryan Burke checked his weapon systems. Torpedoes loaded and ready, Captain. Amy Collins opened communication channels to the other ships. The cruiser Wolverine and frigate Eagle are acknowledging. They're staying too. Jake smiled. This was why he loved his crew. They knew the mission was probably suicide, but they were going to do it anyway because it was the right thing to do. All right, people. Let's get to work. We have 6 hours to figure out how to do something nobody has ever done before. We're going to make the Void Hunters bleed. The Void Hunter fleet dropped out of hyperspace like death itself. 3 massive dreadnoughts appeared first, each one the size of a small city. Their black hulls seemed to absorb light, making them look like holes cut in space. Behind them came dozens of smaller ships, but even the smallest was twice the size of the Defiance. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the enemy fleet form up. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. In 20 years of military service, he had never seen anything so terrifying. Holy hell, Ryan Burke whispered from the tactical station. Captain, I'm reading over 40 ships. 3 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, and at least 25 destroyers. What about our forces? Jake asked. The Wolverine, Eagle, and us. 3 ships against 40. Jake opened a channel to the other ships. Captain Torres, Commander Ross, you still with us? Captain Sam Torres of the Wolverine replied first. His voice was calm but tight. We're here, Jake, not going anywhere. Commander Nina Ross of the Eagle sounded younger and more nervous. My crew is ready, Captain Morrison. We'll follow your lead. Jake looked at the tactical display. The enemy was moving slowly, probably scanning the human ships and planning their attack. That gave him a few minutes to think. Lisa, how are our engines? Jake asked. Chief Engineer Lisa Ward was already working at her station. I've pushed the fusion reactors to 110%. Any higher and we risk a meltdown, but we'll have full power for the fight. Amy, are the transports clear? Communications Officer Amy Collins checked her instruments. The last transport ships are loading now. They need another 4 hours to get everyone aboard and jump to hyperspace. 4 hours. Jake had to keep 3 ships alive for 4 hours against an enemy that had destroyed entire fleets in less time. All? Right, people. Here's what we're going to do. We'll use standard coalition tactics to start. Maybe we can hurt them before they adapt. The battle began when the Void Hunter fleet moved forward. Jake ordered his small force to spread out, using the asteroids near Kepler Station for cover. The Wolverine took the left flank, the Eagle took the right, and the Defiance held the center. Firing solution locked, Ryan Burke reported. All ships open fire, Jake ordered. The 3 human ships unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and particle beams lit up space. For a moment, Jake felt hope. Their weapons were hitting the enemy ships, and he could see damage on their hulls, but then the Void Hunters fired back. The enemy weapons were different from anything Jake had seen. They fired streams of energy that seemed to eat through shields and armor. The Eagle took a direct hit and her port side exploded in a ball of fire. Eagle, report, Jake called. We're hurt bad, Nina Ross replied. Lost main engines and half our weapons. The Void Hunters adapted quickly. Jake watched in horror as their shields began to deflect the human weapons. Within minutes, shots that had been damaging the enemy ships were bouncing off harmlessly. They're learning, Lisa Ward said, just like in all the other battles. The Wolverine tried a different approach, firing a spread of nuclear missiles. The missiles hit 3 enemy destroyers and destroyed them completely. Jake felt a moment of hope, but it didn't last long. The Void Hunters studied the missile attack and began firing similar weapons back at the human ships. Incoming nuclear strike, Ryan Burke warned. Impact in 30 seconds. Evasive maneuvers, Jake ordered. The Defiance twisted and turned, trying to avoid the enemy missiles. 2 of them missed, but the third one detonated close enough to shake the ship violently. Lights flickered on the bridge and Jake could smell smoke. Damage report, Jake called. Hull breach on Deck 7, Lisa replied. We've lost 2 plasma cannons and our main communications array is damaged. The battle was going exactly like all the others. The humans would fight hard for the first hour, maybe score some hits, but then the Void Hunters would adapt and turn the tide. Jake had read every battle report, studied every tactic that had been tried. Nothing worked for long against these machines. That's when Jake remembered what Dr. Pete Hansen had said about fighting differently, about being more human instead of trying to outthink the machines. Amy, can you still communicate with the other ships? Yes, sir, but we're down to short range only. Good. Tell them to follow our lead no matter how crazy it looks. Jake turned to his crew. I want everyone to forget everything you learned in the academy. Forget the tactical manuals. Forget the standard procedures. We're going to try something new. What do you mean, Captain? Ryan asked. Fire at empty space. Sir? You heard me. Fire a full spread of torpedoes at that empty patch of space between the 2nd and 3rd dreadnought. Ryan looked confused but followed orders. 6 quantum torpedoes flew toward empty space and exploded harmlessly. Now turn us 15 degrees to port and fire our main guns at the asteroid field. Lisa Ward looked up from her station. Captain, are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Lisa, just trust me. Fire at the asteroids. The Defiance's plasma cannons destroyed 3 large asteroids. The debris spread out in a cloud of rocks and dust. Jake watched the Void Hunter fleet carefully. For the first time, their perfect formation wavered slightly. The lead dreadnought slowed down, as if its artificial intelligence was trying to figure out what the humans were doing. It's working, Amy said with surprise. They're confused. All ships, random firing pattern, Jake ordered. Shoot at anything except the enemy ships, asteroids, empty space, even each other's shields if you have to. The Wolverine and Eagle began firing randomly. The Wolverine shot at a derelict satellite while the Eagle targeted a small moon. The Void Hunter fleet stopped advancing completely. They can't predict what we're doing, Pete Hansen said. He had come to the bridge to watch the battle. Their computers are designed to adapt to logical tactics, but there's no logic to what we're doing. That's the point, Doc, Jake said. Jenny, take us on a random course. Don't follow any pattern. Pilot Jenny Carter looked nervous. Sir, if I don't follow proper flight patterns, we could crash into the asteroid field. Then we'll crash. But at least we'll crash on our own terms. Jenny began flying the ship in ways that violated every rule in the pilot's manual. She dove toward asteroids and pulled up at the last second. She spun the ship in corkscrews that made half the crew sick. She flew straight at the enemy fleet, then suddenly turned away for no reason. The Void Hunters tried to predict her movements, but they couldn't. Their targeting systems kept missing as the Defiance danced through space like a drunken bird. Captain, Ryan called out, the enemy ships are firing at each other. I think their targeting computers are malfunctioning. Jake grinned. For the first time in the war, the Void Hunters were making mistakes, but the celebration was short-lived. Even confused, the enemy still had 40 ships against 3, and Jake could see that they were starting to adapt to the chaos. Sir, the Wolverine is in trouble, Amy reported. Jake looked at the tactical display. The Wolverine had taken heavy damage and was falling behind. The Void Hunters were focusing their fire on the wounded ship. Sam, get out of there, Jake called. Negative, Jake. We're going to ram the lead dreadnought. Tell my wife I love her. The Wolverine accelerated toward the enemy flagship. Jake watched helplessly as his friend made the ultimate sacrifice. The cruiser smashed into the dreadnoughts. Hull and both ships exploded in a brilliant flash of light. 1 down, Jake said grimly. 39 to go. Dr. Pete Hansen ran through the corridors of the Defiance, moving from one wounded crew member to another. The ship had taken heavy damage in the last hour of fighting, and his medical bay was full of injured people. But as he worked, Pete began to notice something strange. The crew members who were still fighting weren't following normal procedures. Jenny Carter was flying the ship like she was drunk, spinning and diving in ways that should have gotten her kicked out of flight school. Tony Brooks at the weapons station was firing at targets based on what he called gut feelings instead of computer targeting. Even Lisa Ward was adjusting power systems manually instead of using the automated controls, and it was working. Pete finished bandaging a plasma burn on a young engineer's arm and hurried to the bridge. Captain Jake Morrison was standing at the center of it all, watching the battle unfold on the main screen. "Jake, I think I figured something out," Pete said. "Talk to me, Doc. We need all the help we can get." Pete pointed at the tactical display. "Look at what we're doing compared to every other battle against the Void Hunters. In every previous fight, our forces used standard military tactics: formation flying, coordinated attacks, logical targeting priorities. The Void Hunters adapted to all of it because it followed patterns." "Right. That's why we started shooting at empty space," Jake said. "But it's more than that. Look at Jenny's flying." Pete pulled up the flight data on a side screen. "She's not just flying randomly. She's flying based on instinct, emotion, and experience. When she sees an asteroid, she doesn't calculate the safest course around it. She just feels where the ship should go." Jake watched the data scroll by. Jenny's flight path looked like chaos, but there was something else there. Something that couldn't be programmed into a computer. "The Void Hunters can adapt to logic," Pete continued. "But they can't adapt to something that isn't logical in the first place. They can't predict what we'll do because we're not thinking, we're feeling." On the main screen, the Defiant spun around a cluster of asteroids while the Eagle limped along behind them. The Void Hunter fleet was still pursuing, but their formations were loose and confused. Several enemy ships had actually collided with each other while trying to predict the humans' movements. "All right, Doc. If you're right, then we need to get more emotional, not less." Jake opened the ship-wide communication system. "Attention all crew. This is the captain. I want everyone to stop thinking and start feeling. Engineers, don't follow the manual. Run the systems based on what feels. Right, gunners, shoot at whatever makes you angry. Pilots, fly like you're trying to impress someone you love." Lisa Ward looked up from her engineering station. "Captain, that's completely against regulations." "Lisa, regulations didn't save the last 7 fleets. Maybe it's time to try something else." Lisa stared at him for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "You know what, Jake? I've always hated the way this ship's power distribution system works. The designers were idiots. I'm going to rewire it the way it should have been built." "Do it." Lisa began pulling panels off the walls and rerouting power cables by hand. She wasn't following any technical manual or computer simulation. She was rewiring the ship based on 20 years of experience and a deep understanding of how energy should flow. The results were immediate. The Defiance's weapons became more powerful, and the engines ran smoother than they had in years. But, more importantly, the power fluctuations were completely unpredictable. The Void Hunters couldn't adapt to systems that changed every few minutes based on one person's intuition. "Tony, how are you doing with weapons?" Jake asked. "Weapons officer." Tony Brooks was sweating at his station. "I stopped using the targeting computer, Captain. I'm aiming based on where I think the enemy ships want to go, not where they are." "That doesn't make sense." "I know, sir, but it's working. I've hit 6 enemy ships in the last 20 minutes. Jake looked at the tactical display. Tony was right. Somehow, by aiming at empty space where he felt the enemy would be, he was hitting targets that should have been impossible to reach. "Amy, what about communications?" Amy Collins was working with equipment that was half destroyed by enemy fire. "I'm sending fake orders to our own ships, sir. Orders that don't mean anything. But the Void Hunters are intercepting them and trying to figure out what we're planning." "What kind of fake orders?" "Things like execute Butterfly 7 and begin Rainbow Protocol." "Complete nonsense. But the enemy is wasting time and processing power trying to decode them." Jake laughed, despite the situation. His crew was fighting the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy, with made-up battle plans and weapons that were aimed by intuition. It should have been a disaster, but somehow it was working. The Eagle, commanded by Nina Ross, was following the Defiance's example. The smaller ship was flying in erratic patterns while firing at seemingly random targets. Several Void Hunter destroyers were trying to surround the Eagle, but they couldn't predict where it would go next. "Captain Ross, how are you holding up?" "Over there?" Jake called. "We're barely hanging together, Captain Morrison. But my crew is getting creative. My chief engineer just turned our damaged sensor array into a weapon by overloading it with random energy pulses. We don't know what it does, but the enemy ships keep backing away from us." Jake shook his head in amazement. The human crews were literally making up new weapons and tactics as they fought. They were using broken equipment in ways it was never designed for, and somehow it was effective against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. But the celebration was short-lived. Jake could see that the Void Hunters were adapting even to chaos. Their computers were starting to find patterns in the randomness. Some of the enemy ships were beginning to predict the humans' movements again. "Doc, they're learning to adapt. To our emotions too," Jake said. "Then we need to get more human, not less," Pete replied. "What's the most human thing you can think of?" Jake thought about it. What made humans different from every other species in the galaxy? What made them special? "Stubbornness," Jake said finally. "We never know when to quit." "Exactly. The Void Hunters can adapt to our weapons, our tactics, even our emotions, but they can't adapt to our refusal to surrender." Jake opened the communication channel again. "All crew, this is the captain. I want you to think about why we're fighting. Think about the families on those transport ships. Think about your own families back home. Think about everyone who's counting on us to buy them time." The crew's performance changed immediately. Jenny Carter began flying with a fierce determination that made the ship dance through enemy fire. Tony Brooks started shooting with an anger that came from losing friends in previous battles. Lisa Ward worked on the engines with a protective love for the ship that had been her home for 10 years. The Void Hunter fleet tried to adapt to this new emotional state, but they couldn't. How do you program a computer to understand a mother's love for her children? How do you teach a machine to feel the anger of losing a friend? "We're actually winning," Ryan Burke said with amazement. "We've destroyed 8 enemy ships and damaged a dozen more." Jake looked at the tactical display. It was true. 2 human ships had somehow managed to hurt a fleet that should have destroyed them in minutes. But the cost was terrible. The Eagle was barely holding together, and the Defiance had damage on every deck. "How much time do the transports need?" Jake asked. 2 more hours, Amy replied. 2 hours. Jake looked at his battered ship and wounded crew. The Defiance was held together by willpower and prayer. The Eagle was even worse off. And there were still over 30 enemy ships out there. "All right, people," Jake said. "We've proven that humans can hurt these things. Now we need to prove that humans don't know how to quit." The USS Defiance was dying. Jake Morrison could feel it in the way the deck plates vibrated under his feet, and hear it in the groaning of the hull. Half the lights on the bridge had failed, and smoke drifted through the corridors. The life support systems were running on backup power, and that wouldn't last much longer. "Hull breach on Deck 4, Lisa Ward reported. Her voice was hoarse from breathing smoke and shouting orders over the noise of failing systems. "I've sealed it with emergency foam, but we've lost another section." "Casualties?" Jake asked. "Doctor." Pete Hansen's voice came over the communication system from the medical bay. 17 dead, 43 wounded. I'm running out of supplies, Jake." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. 17 good people dead because he had decided to stay and fight. But then he thought about the 40,000 civilians on the transport ships, and he knew he had made the right choice. "Amy, what's the status on the evacuation?" Communications officer Amy Collins was working with equipment that had been hit by enemy fire 3 times. Half her console was held together with repair tape and spare wire. "The last transport ship is loading now, Captain. They need 90 more minutes." 90 minutes. Jake looked at the tactical display. The Eagle was still fighting, but barely. Commander Nina Ross had lost main power twice and was running on emergency batteries. Her ship was missing entire sections of hull, and she was down to 2 working weapons. The Void Hunter fleet had taken heavy losses too. The humans had destroyed 12 enemy ships and damaged many more. But there were still 28 Void Hunter vessels left, including 2 massive dreadnoughts, and Jake could see that they were finally adapting to human unpredictability. "They're learning," Ryan Burke said from the tactical station. "Their targeting is getting better. They're starting to predict some of our movements." Jake watched as a group of enemy destroyers successfully surrounded and destroyed a piece of space debris that Jenny Carter had been using for cover. The Void Hunters were beginning to understand that humans would use anything as a shield or weapon. "All right, people. They're adapting to our chaos. We need to dig deeper." "What do you mean, Captain?" Jenny asked. She was piloting the ship with one arm in a sling and a bandage over her left eye. "I mean, we need to find the part of being human that no machine can ever understand." Jake thought about what made humans truly different from artificial intelligence. Machines could learn to be random. They could even simulate emotions if programmed correctly. But there was something deeper, something that came from millions of years of evolution and struggle. "Lisa, I want you to stop trying to fix the ship properly. Just keep it running any way you can." "I've been doing that for the last hour, Jake." "No, I mean, really, any way you can. Use parts that weren't designed to work together. Wire systems in ways that should be impossible. Make the ship work through pure stubbornness." Lisa stared at him for a moment, then nodded. She began tearing apart functioning systems to fix broken ones. She connected the food processors to the shield generators. She used parts from the entertainment system to repair the engines. Nothing she did made logical sense, but somehow it worked. The ship's performance became completely unpredictable. One moment the shields would be at full power, the next they would fail completely, then suddenly they would be stronger than ever. The engines would speed up and slow down for no apparent reason. Even Jake didn't know what his own ship would do next. "Tony, forget everything you know about weapons targeting. Don't aim at the enemy's ships. Aim at where you think they don't want to go." Weapons Officer Tony Brooks looked confused. "Sir, that doesn't make any sense." "I know, do it anyway." Tony began firing at empty space around the enemy ships. But he wasn't just shooting randomly. He was trying to understand what the Void Hunter ships were afraid of. He shot at asteroids that might fall on them. He fired at gas clouds that might explode. He targeted empty space that the enemy ships seemed to be avoiding. The results were amazing. The Void Hunter ships began moving in ways that brought them into the path of other weapons. They were so busy avoiding Tony's seemingly random shots that they flew directly into attacks from the Eagle. "Jenny, I want you to fly this ship like you're trying to get us all killed." "Captain?" "You heard me. Fly us straight at the biggest enemy ship, then at the last second don't crash into it." Jenny's face went pale, but she followed orders. The Defiance accelerated directly toward the nearest Void Hunter dreadnought. Every alarm on the ship began screaming as they approached the massive enemy vessel. Pull up, Ryan shouted. "Not yet," Jake said calmly. The dreadnought grew larger and larger on the main screen. Jake could see individual weapon ports and hull plates. The distance counter showed they would impact in 15 seconds. "Now, Jenny." Jenny pulled the ship up so hard that everyone was thrown against their seats. The Defiance skimmed along the dreadnought's hull, so close that Jake could have reached out and touched it. The enemy ship's weapons couldn't target them at such close range, and several Void Hunter destroyers accidentally shot their own flagship while trying to hit the human ship, but the maneuver cost them. The stress of the sharp turn caused a major hull breach, and the ship's artificial gravity failed in 3 sections. "We can't take much more of this," Lisa warned. "The hull is about to come apart." Jake opened a channel to the Eagle. "Nina, how are you holding up?" Commander Ross's voice was weak. "We're done, Jake. Main power is out, life support is failing, and we're down to 1 working weapon, but we're not quitting." "Good. Because I have an idea, and it's completely insane." "I'm listening." "We're going to ram them." There was silence on the communication channel for a moment. Then Nina laughed. "You know what, Jake? That's the most human thing I've heard all day. My crew is with you." Jake turned to address his own crew. "People, we're going to do something that no sane military officer would ever consider. We're going to fly both our ships directly at the enemy fleet and see what happens." "Sir," Ryan said carefully, "that's suicide." "Maybe. But it's our choice to make. The Void Hunters can adapt to our weapons, our tactics, even our emotions. but they can't adapt to our willingness to die for something we believe in. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had followed him through hell for the past 2 hours. They were exhausted, wounded, and scared, but they were also determined to protect the civilians who were still evacuating. Lisa, can you overload our fusion reactors? I can make them unstable. If we ram an enemy ship, both vessels would be destroyed in the explosion. Do it. Amy, send a message to Admiral Sullivan. Tell her that the Defiance and Eagle bought the time they needed. Tell her that humans don't surrender. Message sent, Captain. Jake sat down in his command chair and looked at the tactical display one last time. 2 battered human ships against 28 alien vessels. The odds were impossible, but that had never stopped humans before. All right, people. Let's show these machines what happens when you threaten our families. The USS Defiance and the Eagle accelerated toward the Void Hunter fleet. Behind them, the last transport ship finished loading civilians and prepared to jump to hyperspace. The evacuation was almost complete, but Jake would never know if they made it to safety. He was too busy preparing to ram a dreadnought. The USS Defiance flew straight at the largest Void Hunter dreadnought like a missile aimed at the heart of death itself. Jake Morrison gripped his command chair as the massive enemy ship grew larger on the main screen. Every system on his ship was failing, but somehow they kept moving forward. 30 seconds to impact, Jenny Carter announced. Her voice was steady despite the fact that she was flying them all to their deaths. Lisa, are the reactors ready? Jake asked. Chief Engineer Lisa Ward was covered in burns and cuts from working with damaged systems. The fusion containment is failing on purpose now, Captain. When we hit, both ships will be vaporized. Jake opened a channel to the Eagle. Nina, you still with us? Commander Nina Ross's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. Right behind you, Jake. My crew says to tell yours it's been an honor. The Void Hunter dreadnought was trying to move out of the way, but it was too big and too slow. Smaller enemy ships were firing everything they had at the 2 human vessels, but the Defiance and Eagle kept coming. Plasma bursts and energy beams tore through their hulls, but nothing could stop them now. 15 seconds to impact, Jenny called out. Jake looked around his bridge one last time. Amy Collins was still at her communication station, sending final messages to the evacuation fleet. Ryan Burke was firing their last weapons at enemy ships. Dr. Pete Hansen had come to the bridge to be with them at the end. Lisa Ward was holding the ship together through pure determination. These people had become his family over the years. They had followed him into an impossible battle because it was the right thing to do. Now they were going to die together, but they were going to take a lot of enemies with them. 10 seconds, Jenny said. The dreadnought's hull filled the entire main screen. Jake could see the panic in the enemy fleet as they realized what the humans were doing. Several Void Hunter ships were actually backing away from their own flagship, afraid of being caught in the explosion. 5 seconds. Jake smiled. The Void Hunters were afraid. For the first time in their existence, these perfect machines were experiencing something like fear. They couldn't understand why the humans would throw their lives away for strangers. They couldn't adapt to an enemy that chose death over defeat. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The Defiance slammed into the dreadnought's hull with the force of a small asteroid. The ship's fusion reactors overloaded instantly, creating a miniature star that consumed both vessels. The explosion was so bright that it could be seen from the other side of the solar system, but something impossible happened. At the last moment before impact, Jake had ordered Jenny to aim for a specific section of the dreadnought's hull. Lisa had scanned the enemy ship and found what looked like a weak point. It was a desperate gamble based on nothing but human intuition and hope. The explosion tore through the dreadnought's hull and reached its main power core. The massive ship broke apart in a chain reaction that destroyed 3 nearby Void Hunter cruisers. The Eagle, following close behind, rammed into another enemy ship and created a second explosion. In the space of 30 seconds, the humans had destroyed 6 Void Hunter vessels and damaged several more. But more importantly, they had done something that shook the enemy's artificial intelligence to its core. They had chosen to die rather than surrender. The remaining Void Hunter ships stopped attacking. For the first time in recorded galactic history, The enemy fleet hesitated. Their computers were trying to process what had just happened, but they couldn't understand it. How do you fight an enemy that considers death a victory? Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the battle from her flagship 3 hours away. The long-range sensors had picked up the massive explosions, and she knew what they meant. Jake Morrison and his crew were gone, along with Nina Ross and her people, but their sacrifice had given the evacuation fleet the time it needed. All transport ships have jumped to hyperspace, her communication officer reported. 40,000 civilians are safe. Kate closed her eyes and said a silent prayer for the crews of the Defiance and Eagle. Then she opened her eyes and got back to work. The data from the battle was already being analyzed by coalition scientists. For the first time, they had proof that the Void Hunters could be defeated. 6 months later, Kate stood before the Galactic Coalition Council on the capital world of New Geneva. Representatives from dozens of species filled the Great Hall, all waiting to hear about humanity's discovery. The key to defeating the Void Hunters isn't better weapons or stronger shields, Kate began. It's something that can't be programmed or copied. It's the human refusal to accept defeat. She activated a holographic display showing the battle data from the Defiance. Captain Morrison and his crew discovered that the enemy's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They adapt to everything logical, but they can't adapt to pure human stubbornness. A Zephyrian counselor raised a tentacle. Admiral, how do we use this knowledge? We cannot ask every crew to sacrifice themselves. We don't have to, Kate replied. We just need to add human crews to every coalition ship, not as commanders, but as what we're calling chaos factors. Their job is to do things that make no logical sense, to introduce the beautiful unpredictability that artificial intelligence cannot counter. She showed images of new mixed crews training together. Humans working alongside aliens, teaching them to trust their instincts instead of their computers. Alien pilots learning to fly based on emotion rather than calculation. Mixed crews practicing battle tactics that were intentionally chaotic and random. The Void Hunters are still out there, Kate continued. But now we know their weakness. They can adapt to any pattern, any logic, any strategy, but they cannot adapt to a species that simply refuses to quit. The Council voted unanimously to implement the new doctrine. Human officers were assigned to ships throughout the galaxy, carrying with them the spirit of the USS Defiance. They taught alien crews to embrace chaos, to trust their feelings, and most importantly, to never surrender no matter how bad things looked. Years later, when the next Void Hunter fleet emerged from dark space, they faced a very different galaxy. Coalition ships that flew in impossible patterns, fired weapons based on emotion rather than targeting computers, and refused to retreat even when logic said they should. The ancient enemy that had harvested civilizations for millions of years met their match in humanity's greatest strength, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The machines had finally encountered something they could never adapt to or understand. The spirit of Captain Jake Morrison and the crew of the USS Defiance lived on in every human officer who looked at impossible odds and said, "We're not quitting." They had proven that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning, but from refusing to fall. In the end, humanity saved the galaxy not by being smarter or stronger than their enemies, but by being more human than any machine could ever comprehend. They turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength and taught the universe that some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight seems hopeless. The USS Defiance was gone, but it would never be forgotten. Its legacy became the foundation of a new way of thinking about war, peace, and what it means to be human in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors. The ship that refused to fall had shown everyone else how to stand.